Thanks for sticking around. Last half hour between you and lunch, so we'll try to keep it
Focus.
interesting. Yeah, try to stay focused, stay on point. I'm here to talk about digital artifacts on Chameleon. And this one, I'll have some demoing, but also, I mean, it's just really through a web browser. So, feel free to log in and kind of poke around and explore the system once we get there. And to get started, just a little bit of context. So when we talk about a digital artifact, what do we mean? And in this case, kind of a general definition that we're using is it's just some packaged unit of work that captures some aspect of an experiment. So it doesn't have to be, all artifacts don't have to be full experiments. They might be just a reference to like some disk image. It might be, a template that describes all the hardware to set up for some experiment, or it could be a notebook that's, the whole thing. All the hardware you need, how to provision it, software to download, something to run. So examples, we have artifacts that are kind of pointers to disk images that exist on a test bed, and in our case, Chameleon. Orchestration templates, so heat, those describe hardware, like a hardware that you would need and how to provision it and how to connect it all up if you're provisioning like a cluster. And then also obviously Jupyter notebooks that you've been seeing from Trovy, so all of those that Mike was kind of going through are the things that we'll dive into a little bit here that provide the whole kind of end-to-end experiment. One thing to note, so with and all of this digital artifacts that I'm going to talk about center on Trovy, which is our system for this collection of digital artifacts. And one thing that's worth pointing out is we store the digital artifacts in Trovy, but if you have large data sets or images, things like that, they're not typically stored in Trovy. You store a reference to them somewhere else in some other proper storage system. So digital artifacts have some things in common. So they're going to have some amount of metadata, titles, descriptions, those kind of things. Some content, usually this is documentation, code, maybe small data sets or image references. We also have an ability to link to other artifacts. So the main use case for this is, if you were here for yesterday, Frida, talking about some of her courses, she makes those available on Trovy. And, you can imagine a course has a lot of sections, right? And each section is an artifact. And you want to link to those other sections. So using those links from an artifact to another artifact to kind of show that relation. So like I've been saying, Trovy is our collection of digital artifacts. We have over 400 right now. This is everything from, again, courses, tutorials, stuff Mike was showing, or some tutorials that we have for Chia Edge. Environment artifacts, so examples of how to deploy like a Bastion host in front of your cluster. And then also a big one, reproducibility, right? So digital artifacts, it's a lot of them are people that have experiments and they want to make them reproducible so they can describe it in a notebook and then make it available on Trovy, and then others can go find that artifact, launch it, and reproduce the experiment. Artifacts with Trovy are tightly integrated with Chameleon in particular, but they don't have to be. The idea behind Trovy is to be multi-test bed. So, if you have use cases for that, come talk to us and we can work on that. But all the ones I'll be demonstrating here are Chameleon specific. Artifacts can be stored, like the content of the artifact can be stored elsewhere. So you could make a Git repository with your artifact, with your Jupyter notebook, because Git and GitHub, things like that are pretty easy to work with, right? So you think of these artifacts, you want to update them periodically. Storing them in Git makes it very easy to change it as you go. And then Trovy would kind of have a reference and load that artifact from GitHub, but your changes on GitHub would be kind of the core of the artifact. But they'd be made available through Trovy. And then, Trovy, we also, through it, we have a simple UI, which is what I'll be going over. And that allows you to find these artifacts, launch them, download them. We also have a public API if you're interested in interacting with Trovy at the API level. So to get started, if you want to go to this site, if you want to just go to trovy.chameleoncloud.org, you can log in with your credentials that you've been using for, I think, the first part of the tutorial and start exploring. This is what the interface looks like, and I'll jump over to that in a little bit here. It provides search and other ways to kind of narrow down on artifacts. So one thing worth calling out is we have tags and badges. There is a slight difference between them. Tags, we define what the tags are. but authors, when they add artifacts, can attach those tags to their artifacts, so they get to decide. Badges, we define what they are, and we only apply them if we think they apply. So we have fewer of them, but we verify that like an educational artifact is in fact educational. Whereas an education tag, an author might apply to something that, you know, maybe they think is educational, but we wouldn't classify it as educational. So there is a slight difference there. You know, as you kind of filter artifacts. And as a result, you know, lots of artifacts have neither associated with them, which is where searching comes in handy. You can make, so when you create an artifact to begin with, it is private, and you can share it with other users. You can either add them directly as like a collaborator or a fellow administrator. You can make them public, which is all the ones we'll be looking at today. And then, like I talked about before, these artifacts can be stored on GitHub. So if you wanted to extend somebody else's artifact, you could fork it on GitHub and then add it as your own artifact, having, you know, modified it in some way. So a few things that you can do that are kind of interesting. Obviously, a big use case of digital artifacts is reproducibility. And when you think about reproducibility, you think about kind of there's the author who's making this experiment available and the user. So the author is the one that's packaging an experiment, and they want to share the experiment and publish it. You know, once they've completed the experiment, they're ready for others to reproduce it. And they also want to be able to grant access for reproducibility, which we'll get into some ways that you can do that with Trovi in just a minute here. And then the user is the one that's trying to discover them, maybe fork them, reproduce them. So these are just links to the docs on how to do some of these things. So as an author, you might be wondering, you know, how do I add an artifact? So when the slides are made available, you know, these would be the different ways you could, you know, go jump to different parts in the doc on how to answer some of these questions and do these things. And we'll go through a little bit here with the demo. A few more things. So there's, I don't know the first part if we talked about day passes, but there are day passes, which basically, I'm pretty sure, you know, in the first part of the tutorial, Mark went over. So you can create an account on Chameleon, but you have to join an active project, right? So for this tutorial, we have a project you have to join. But if you, as an author, want people to reproduce your work, it's kind of cumbersome to have all of these people that might not really be Chameleon users have to go join some active project or become a TI just to reproduce your work. So the day pass is what enables an author to grant access to these users for a short amount of time with the intent of reproducing their work. So they can get like, you know, 3 hours or, you know, a day access to Chameleon, reproduce the work, you know, and then the access is revoked. You can publish with Zenodo to get DOI. However, just when you do that, the artifact does become public, and also you can't delete it at that point, so it's kind of becomes a permanent record that's out there, just to be aware of if you decide to publish with Zenodo and Trovi. Kind of went over this already, and you probably went over it before, so, you know, launching these artifacts, you guys won't have a problem today because you're on the tutorial project, but otherwise you would need an active allocation or, you know, using a day pass on somebody else's artifact. When you do launch artifacts, if you're provisioning instances, you know, make sure you do things like reasonable lengths to your leases, upload your large data sets to places that are kind of meant for large data sets, like an object store. I'm not going to go through all of this, that'll be in the slides, but we do have some best practices. If you're interested in creating artifacts for reproducibility, you know, following some of these best practices, I think makes artifacts that are better for the community. So yeah, but we don't need to go over that. So we'll dive into some specific artifacts. One of them, the main ones that we'll talk about are, again, what you've been seeing, these Jupyter notebooks, which we've kind of gone through, but, you know, to give an idea, that's the nice thing about a Jupyter notebook in terms of experiments is it allows this sort of literate programming where you combine the documentation with the code. So you can kind of, as someone running a notebook, you can read about it, and then you can run that particular step. And then you can read about the next thing to do, and then run that step. Whether that's interacting with Chameleon, so you're reading about how do I provision resources, you run the code, you see that I've provisioned the resources, all the way through to producing, you know, your results that you include in a paper. So some artifacts, I'm highlighting 3 here, one educational one. So this is one of Friday's artifacts that she, I think, talked about in her talk. This is what they look like when you go to them. You know, it has that description. You can launch it, download it, view it on GitHub in this case. An environment artifact looks a little different, so this is one of our supported images, so you can see that it has the disk images, and what those are is those are essentially pointers. You know, when we have the content here, instead of launching it on Chameleon, you do launch it on Chameleon, but not through our Jupyter interface, which is what would be showing up there. Instead, you know, you pick which site the particular image. So this Ubuntu 24 image, this CUDA image, you could pick, you know, do I want to launch it at TAC, and then it takes you to Horizon at TAC for that image where you can launch it and work with it on TAC or UC or KVM. A reproducible artifact looks similar to the others, or especially the education one, where this is going to launch a Jupyter notebook. They provide their description here, you know, some tips for a first-time user and how to reproduce their experiment. Again, the key kind of glue there would be launching that Jupyter notebook and following through it. So now, we're gonna just take a look at Trovy here. So here on Trovy, you know, if you want to go to it and browse, you can start finding some artifacts that you think are interesting. And in a minute here, we can talk about how we can create some and how they might be of benefit to you. But to get started, I mean, pretty simple. So if we wanted to find all artifacts, fall in it, you know, this brings up 17. You can do things like a Boolean operator. So if we look for Paul or Marshall, do we find more? Oh, 18, so that added a few more. We can use the tags and the badges to filter down. So say, you know, as I mentioned, we have like our disk images and those kind of things that are in here. So if you were looking for, you know, an appliance that's supported by Chameleon, you can use the tags and the badges to kind of find all appliances, and then also the ones that are marked as Chameleon supported. And I think that's Cheat Edge is the one that Mike just went over. So it brings that up right away, and you could find, you know, that tutorial. Yeah, so that's kind of the general idea. If, you know, another way you could find some quality artifacts. So the badges, as I said, are ones that we assign. So if you're looking for, you know, okay, ones that Chameleon has vetted as these are educational, and let's say you're teaching a course on something about reproducibility, well, now you can narrow down to one, find one specific artifact. And this is an educational artifact from Freda. That, you know, we're not gonna, we don't have to go through it, but then what would happen, I already clicked on launch, but it launches a Jupyter notebook like you saw with Mike's examples. And then, you know, we could step through this notebook. And again, we're not gonna actually do all of these things. Provisioning nodes and stuff like that would take a long time on bare metal. And so the last thing that I'll show is creating an artifact. When you go to create an artifact, you can either manually enter stuff or you can import it from GitHub. We'll do the manual entry one, but the GitHub one here has the steps that you would follow. So you know, create your normal repository on GitHub, and then you put a trovy.json file, which includes kind of all the metadata for that artifact. You drop it in the root of the repo. You can either manually come up with that JSON file. There's obviously some structure to it that you need to be aware of. And that's why we have the Trovy CLI tool that like you can just kind of plug in your information and then it generates that file for you. You drop it into the root and then you just paste your URL there. For manual, pretty basic. You just go through title, description, assign any tags. Again, this is, you know, me as an author. I get to pick which tags I assign. I can't add any new tags. You know, we're worried that would get a little untenable if anybody just came up with whatever word they wanted. But if you have thoughts there that aren't covered, you know, let us know, reach out to us. Add authors for the artifact, kind of the basics there. Then when you go to create an artifact, that populates like the kind of base artifact. You have to actually go to the artifact then to add more. So when you go to the artifact, like this one here, that I had already created. Here we go. So now we have an artifact. If you go to edit your artifact, that's where you can start adding in other things here. So this is where you could add another collaborator. So, see, I'm an administrator here, you could add a collaborator or more administrators. You could create new versions that you can import from Git. If it's a disk image, in particular, we have the Chameleon site, so if it's an image UUID on one of our sites, you can specify it there. Obviously, if it were another test bed, you could pick other heat templates, which I mentioned before. You'd add that here, and I guess I can go find an example of the heat template artifact that we have. And then the linking, so if you had other artifacts that you wanted to link to, you could do that there, and just save the links. So if we go back to artifacts, let's see if we can find one that's a heat template. And I can show just what that looks like. Because again, the experience of launching the heat template is going to be a little different than some of these others that are like Jupyter-based or the disk image-based ones. Well, we can do both. So let's see, if you have this CUDA one, if you go to launch for G-Attack, it brings you to that image in Horizon, which is then where you can go and click on launch and launch that image. Or go back here and we find, let's see if we can find a heat template one. I think this should be one. Yeah, so this one is an example we have for setting up an NFS share using heat. So we have this template. We do have some instructions. So when you launch this, again, you don't have the launch button up here because it's not a Jupyter notebook. Instead, what you would do is you would click on these instructions, which would tell you that you're going to copy this template text. You go to the site you want to launch. It's going to take you directly to the place where you can launch heat templates, and then you would use that heat template, you paste it into your stack and launch the stack. So that's kind of the main artifacts, or different artifacts that you can go through. One thing I want to do, since we have a little bit of time here, first, I guess, let me stop and ask, are there any questions? Yeah.
I have a quick one. So it's really cool. I just have started writing this data visualization notebook.
Yeah.
When I click that launch in Chameleon from one of the images on Trovy, where do I see the resources that I'm using? I guess I just haven't connected it to the project allocation or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So so when you go and you launch a notebook like this, you're going to set your project. So in this example, you'd set your project here to be the one that's for the tutorial.
Okay.
And then once you do that, if you jump over to Horizon, you'll be able to see your reservations and your instances that are created on the particular site. So here it'd be using G8UC by default, or you change that to G-Attack, and you could go then see your resources in Horizon. It is a little bit disconnected, kind of like Mike mentioned with G-Edge, where you could write Python G to show those resources too, but most notebooks don't have kind of that aspect to them. Mm-hmm. So you'd go, see them all in Horizon typically, or using the OpenStack CLI for your project.
And this one, I think, is just super lightweight. It's just plotting some example data.
Okay.
So it doesn't look like it's interacting with any resources, and
right.
So it's just running on the notebook.
Yeah, exactly.
That's okay if it's light enough.
Yep. So it could just be completely contained in the notebook, and it doesn't have to use any resources. A lot of artifacts do, because Chameleon, one of the big benefits is sort of that bare metal thing, right? Access, and so that's what they do is they go through and they provision resources, and we can kind of talk through an example here because I want to hit on some of what. So Connor gave a talk yesterday about how he uses Chameleon for this open source tools for chip design, and creating images, and you could think of those as digital artifacts, and then having other users that would come to Chameleon and be able to do some of these things. So I want to talk about how these tools could maybe help a case like Connor's. But yeah, any other questions so far? No? Okay. So for a case like Connor, right? So we were talking about how you have these open source tools, and you install them on a bare metal instance and then run them all. And every time, if your lease deletes your instance, then you provision an instance again, and you go through, and I'm guessing, do you use mostly the Horizon UI and you click through to provision your instance, right? So you're doing all those things, then you get to your instance and it's a blank slate, so you got to reinstall everything, right? So if instead, a few things I'll highlight here, and some different tools besides Trovy, and again, we don't really have time to actually do them all, but so say you're a user like Connor, you have all this software, and you want to be making these things easier for others in your community, other chip designers, to come and use these tools on Chameleon. So one thing you could do is, so Connor, when you go and you make your instance, you create your instance, you're running Ubuntu, I think 22 you said, running on bare metal. So you go to your instance, you SSH in, and then you install your software, do all those things, and you say like, okay, I've got it all set up, all the tools are installed. If any of those tools, I guess they're all open source, so then what you'd want to do is there's this tool bundled into our instances called CC Snapshot. So you've installed all your software, you go use this tool CC Snapshot, and what this is going to do, and again, I'm not going to actually create a snapshot of the bare metal instance and launch it, it'd take too long. I don't want to keep you guys from lunch. But what this does is this is going to take all that stuff that you installed and put it in a disk image, upload it to Glance, so then the place you're going to find that, so you'd run this tool, it's pretty easy, you don't really have to specify too many options, it just does the whole system, uploads it to Glance. If you have any troubles, open a help desk ticket. And then when you go back to Chameleon, so say you've run that tool and it's like, okay, I created your image in Glance. When you go to images, it's going to be in here, so it had given it some name. Why this isn't finding anything? Okay, there we go. Oh, maybe I don't have any here. Well, so either way, it would have given it some name. If you search for that name, it'll show up in here. And then, so say we're looking for, it would have maybe called it, Connor CC Ubuntu, or Connor Ubuntu 22, whatever, with the name. You'd grab this image ID, and then that would be something you could share with others, right? Because then you'd say like, hey, you can go find this image named Connor Ubuntu 22. It has all these open source chip designing tools in it, so when you go and launch it, you've already got this stuff. Or if your lease dies and you come back and you don't want to reinstall everything, now you've got this image with it all set up. But you can take that one step further, and you can go create a Trovy artifact that's a Jupyter notebook, and if you write your notebook, kind of like this one here, you can have the Python that basically does all these things. So next time, it's like, you almost script out your workflow, right? So if you script out, how do I, get my instance, attach a floating IP, and log in and start using it, you can put all that in a notebook that's called, open source chip design or whatever as a Trovy artifact, that then you can share that with other people in the community. They come to your artifact, they can start reading about how do you do these things. They'll need their own project, and then they would pick the site, so you'd maybe, have everything at TAC, for instance, that image name. You could set the image name, the Connor CC Ubuntu. You could have that predefined in your notebook, so as you executed this notebook, what it's going to do is it's going to pick that site, it's going to find that image, the node type that you've specified, and then creating a floating IP, provisioning it, and as you just execute the notebook, as you saw Mike doing on Chia Edge, that one's a little faster, eventually it's going to become ready, and it'll give you you can write this notebook to have it give you the IP that it attached to the instance, and you could either, you can do the SSH and some of that stuff over Jupyter if you want, or you can just switch back to the terminal, SSH in, and start using your instance. But that way, kind of both cases, right? So you can help others in the community, and they might start using some of this stuff on Chameleon, and they can just follow these things, but also this can be your script for every time, your lease dies and you have to go back. If you just pop up your Jupyter notebook, execute the few things, then your instance is all set up, it's already got the software installed. So that's one way you can use some of these tools to, both help yourself and help others. So I think that's pretty much everything I have. Yeah, that's just at the end here, a link to some of the documentation, forum. But yeah, any other questions? Is there anything about that process that didn't make sense or that I glossed over, I might have skipped some steps because, in my head it makes sense, but, if it didn't make sense to you,
Seems like a pretty straightforward pipeline.
yeah, I mean, is that something that pipeline, using these tools, is that something you would find helpful for doing some of those
Yeah, I
things?
think I was gonna set something up like this when I probably get back anyway, so yeah.
Perfect, yeah, great.
Cause I knew you could snapshot, but I didn't know anything about Trophy.
Yeah, and yeah, if you run into issues, definitely open tickets or, like,
And then is it also good, so like once I open my Trophy, I could make a blog post about that as well, right? Or is that?
yeah, I mean, if you create kind of this little ecosystem of stuff that you wanna advertise to a group, like open source chip designers,
Yeah.
definitely, reach out to us and you can write a blog post. We'd love to have that to help advertise, like, hey, I've got this trophy artifact. It has these tools, these open source software for designing chips. So if you're interested, go try it out, reach out to me, and then others that are doing that would start to use Chameleon, contact with you, stuff like that.
And the Zenodo links for citations.
Yeah.
So you can get permanent immutable links to shared citations and distributed. That also ends up being useful.
Okay.
Right, so if you're writing papers and you want to link your artifact, the stuff that you've created, that Zenodo thing that I mentioned.
Or if you want people to, using your stuff to cite you.
Right, exactly.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, and then when they use this stuff on Trovy, then yeah, they're citing your stuff.
that makes sense. Yeah, I saw like one of the filters on the Trophy thing, it was like, DOI or something. So-
Yeah, it has DOI, yep, exactly. So that's one that, if you do that and you publish it, then you can find an artifact with a DOI.
Yeah. It's actually pretty helpful. Yeah, because now it's not, nowadays for, bigger conference papers, you have to have, the references has to have the DOI links now.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so, and again, I mean, that's the way that we support the DOI today is through Zenodo, which as I mentioned, once you do that, it's gonna be public and you can't delete it.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that's kind of the point, right?
Right.
So, yeah, and you had a question back here?
Yeah, so I think for the type of project that I'm working on, so when you said we had to just reach out to you or raise a ticket, where should we raise a ticket? Or how should we reach out to you?
Yeah, well,
Because I
so,
want to create a similar sort of a blog or a DOI.
so it's same thing, if you kind of get something set up and you wanna advertise it, share it with the community at large, my email's here. If you go to the portal, let's see if I'm logged in. Help desk here, up at the top right. When you click on help desk, it'll bring up this form, and that's where you can fill all this out, and then that'll create a ticket that me or Mike or Cody will see, and then we can work with you on whether you're having trouble with Trovy or these systems, or whether you want to get in contact about sharing some of this with the community and you're interested in writing a blog post, something like that.
Yeah, this is a good default. We also have user forums, which they're currently pretty lightly used, but a lot of this, I want to work on this. Is anyone else interested? How should I share this? It's a good place for discussions like that.
Yep. That's linked there, the
Yep.
forum.chameleoncloud.org. It's not, like Mike said, it's lightly used right now, but the way it gets more used is if people start using it, so. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Any other use cases that anybody's working on that they think something like kind of this Trophy workflow with a notebook and some of these resources might help either you almost, I mean, you could reproduce, you think of reproducibility as like reproducing papers or some like official result, but it's also reproducing my own environment, right? Like, if your environment goes away, it's one way to reproduce your environment. I mean, some of us might write like Ansible to recreate our environments or things like that that automatically deploy stuff, but writing a Jupyter notebook and having it on Trovy, and it can be private, right? So you can have it just be for you. Helps you set stuff up on Chameleon. It's just another way to do that if you find that helpful.
Yeah, I work on a Python package here at NCAR for regional ocean modeling.
Okay.
And so we have workshops, which is nice because then we can provision and request resources for all the people at the workshop. But we also do a lot of things where we'll go to a meeting and be like, hey, this is the notebook. And usually it's either a video or one of us sharing our screen walking through the tools that we have. But do you think it could be an application and maybe with this type of day pass structure where we could have an image, because it's all pretty lightweight, it might need a few hundred megabytes of data just to do a demo. But like you could have some kind of workflow where you're like, if you wanna test this out as we're going through it,
Right.
like go here, spin up this notebook and you can like walk through this process with us.
Yeah, so, I mean, that gets a little interesting, right, cause that's, you're starting to get into domain sciences. And so we sometimes can struggle a little bit with that, right, cause Chameleon is really for like these computer science projects. And so like a lot of these, if you're gonna run a climate model and it requires a ton of resources, like we don't have resources for that, and that's not what Chameleon's for. But Trovy is a little different, and we wanna interact with other test beds. So depending on your use case, and also some of this like domain science, like could be framed as computational science, right? So like Trovy, computational artifacts, but maybe the resources are on another test bed that you wanna start thinking about, like, hey, I wanna host my computational artifacts on Trovy, and I wanna integrate with this other test bed that does more domain science stuff. Yeah, I think that's absolutely a path that, some of these things could be tied together.
Well, and a lot of these tools that we would want to kind of like advertise just to have people have their hands on are kind of the setup before you're running the model. So they're all pretty lightweight, relatively. But then it could interact with some resources we have here at NCAR too.
Sure, yeah, I mean, definitely, if you've got stuff on there, like, reach out to us and talk to us, and we can help try to define, where it fits in and how we can help.
Cool.
Yeah, I just also don't wanna blanket be like, oh yeah, run your climate models on
No,
Chameleon,
yeah,
because I
yeah.
think that would be generally not something we support, but
Yeah.
yeah, for what you're talking about, I think make a lot of sense to.
The the other thing I'd ask is, we've had a lot of discussion the past couple days about what to do about large data sets and training or large results from training. And I know a lot of people are using things like Hugging Face, for example, which has a lot of features baked in. And so I'd be curious about what we can do to better support some of these workflows on Chameleon or in Trovy, and is it something like we should have faster storage and do compression, do all this hard work, or is it fine to like, well, let's just link to this, they already have it stored somewhere, versioned and reproducible, so why not, right?
Yeah.
I don't have like this exhaustive list of use cases, but it seems like we could get an exhaustive list of use cases, and that could help shape some things.
Yeah, I mean, climate too would be another case.
Yeah.
Your data sets.
Yeah.
Probably not for our object store, but you have your own, data system.
Actually, I've got a student right now working on power measurement on edge devices and trying to estimate like how power efficient do you have to be to run with a certain amount of solar power. And so one of the things he did is he went and he found a NASA data set of solar irradiance over the year, time series, with geographic information. So you can say, if I was running, in Chicago and I had this solar panel and this much power, what percentage of the time would it have run out of power and turned off?
Cool. Yeah.
And so like there's,
But that data set isn't stored
no,
locally, you're just
Right.
querying it.
but it's, I feel like we're running into and touching this space more and more.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like we have a bunch of public-facing data sets at NCAR that could be utilized as part of this. And so it'd be really interesting to figure out like the best way to communicate with those.
Yeah.
Especially when it's another HPC system, hopefully that would make it faster, maybe, but.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got Qi at NCAR now, so you can get some real fast interlinks moving around.
Yeah.
All right, that's everything, I think. And we're right at noon, so time for lunch. Thank you.